And so I remember going, gosh, there's my why. My my why in the pandemic was about, gosh, we can't have a family lose a parent. We can't have parents lose children. We can't do any of that. So all of a sudden, that was the power of my why that I could bring to the leadership to say, hey,
Yeah.
listen, we're all going to bring something that's really powerful that we can dig into in the times when it's really going to get tough. And that really navigated and helped me steer through some really challenging times.
Hi, and welcome to Success in Chaos, a healthcare podcast where each episode is dedicated to unlocking success amid the rapidly changing and uncertain environment of healthcare. I'm Angela Adams, the CEO of Inflow Health.
And I'm Kandice Garcia Tomkins, your guide through operational change and owner of Tungsten QI Partners.
We are so excited to introduce our guest today, John Hill. John Hill is the founder and principal of Healthcare Consensus Partners and a seasoned healthcare professional with over 25 years of leadership, really across nonprofit, for profit, faith based health organizations. He is a former CEO of multiple hospitals and health systems, of which we'll go through on this call. John is known for guiding organizations through transformations, transformational moments, authenticity, and a strategic clarity. He is also nationally recognized as an executive coach and a speaker dedicated to helping leaders thrive in the complexity of healthcare. John is a close friend of mine. He also is my CEO advisor and coach and has been so incredibly helpful for me over the course of the last 3 years. Welcome, John. Thanks for being here.
Hey, thanks, guys. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. So we like to start with a little fun exercise called Two Truths and a Lie. So you're going to tell me and Candice three very interesting factoids, of which two are true and one is a lie. And we are going to try to guess which one is the lie.
Love this. All right. So the very first one is when I was 16 years old, I paddled down the Paria River in southern Utah, northern Arizona for 5 days in a handmade kayak. The
That sounds
second,
good. Go on.
the second is in my 40s, I was detained by Ecuadorian customs coming into the country of Ecuador.
Okay.
And the third, when I was 18, I lip synced and danced to the song Every Little Step I Take by Bobby Brown on stage in front of 500 people.
I want that one to be true. Oh, okay. And I want to see the video. Okay.
Candice, what's your guess?
Uh, I'm gonna go with the handmade kayak. I think maybe you did it, but I don't think you made the kayak.
Oh, so you think he changed a fact?
Yeah. It's not,
Well,
I don't think it was a full truth. Yeah.
I think that it was the last one, the lip syncing. John, which one was it?
The lie is that I was not detained by Ecuadorian customs officers when I went in. I was stopped, but I was not detained.
So then, if you could link the video, Allison, of John lip syncing for our guest audience, I think they would all appreciate that.
It,
I
let,
certainly would.
let me just say that was not one of my finest artistic moments. So it was a bad experience. It actually made me start to think about healthcare as a career and not acting or
So it was pivotal, no matter what it was a pivotal moment in your
it was
life.
transformational. It was very chaotic. It was transformational, and here we are today, thankfully. So
Mm-hmm.
I love this. That gives the audience a sense for who John Hill is as a person. He is an adventurer. That's one thing that I should have put in his opener. Probably out of all of my great friends in life, he is probably one of the greatest adventurers in my group, which I
Mm.
appreciate because I have been on many an adventure with John. So let's get into it. We are excited. John, for the first question, I just want to get a sense. You have led multiple organizations, both in urban and rural settings, Bozeman Health being one of them out in Montana, which is where you live now, Peace Health being one of them, a faith-based, I can't even speak today, organization, and HCA, which, you know, a lot of people know who HCA is out there. So, what's your take? Is healthcare in chaos, or what would be your opinion there?
There's no question healthcare is in chaos. And let me just say this. We've all heard healthcare is a very complex business, and it's complex because of all of the reimbursement dynamics that we know are so complicated. Clearly, we know that healthcare is moving through a stage of digitization, meaning that they're starting to be more connected, all of the elements that come with technology and bringing that into a very people driven care model process. Healthcare just has all this complexity. But as I think back through 30 years of working in healthcare, I would say the last 5 years are perhaps one of the most chaotic. And if we think about it, those of us that are here on this podcast today, anybody that's listening, if you were a part of a healthcare team during the pandemic, you know, what incredible opportunities to lead and to experience such incredible chaos, complexity, novelty, all of that was just incredible. But what we saw, specifically for me, what I saw was healthcare teams, physicians, nurses, clinicians, respiratory therapists, anybody who was a part of a care delivery team, just innovate and excel, even elevate the way that we cared for one another, that we cared for our patients. So while it was chaotic, it was beautiful. But if you
Mhm.
think about from that experience in the pandemic, and then you see the aftermath was the financial reckoning, which I often say is the financial pandemic that followed the COVID-19 situation. And then from there, we suffered a workforce or a workforce shortage pandemic. And now here we are today in a policy pandemic where we are uncertain about what's going to happen as it relates to reimbursement. What are some of the governmental programs? What will still be available to Medicaid beneficiaries? What's going to happen with Medicare Advantage? You can just see that over the last 5 years, we as healthcare leaders, we as members of the healthcare team, we have been living in one of the most dynamic, unpredictable, unprecedented times of the history in my career of healthcare. And so, is it chaotic? There's no question about
I love that you flipped that on its head and said that, you know, chaotic but beautiful because of the innovation, the working together as a team, the pulling together as a unit. Because most people, when you say the word chaos, it's a negative connotation. But I agree with you. Very, very amazing things can come out of a period of chaos and complexity. I'm curious to know, you've probably seen across all of the different organizations and you've led a lot of it yourself. What leads to successful outcomes for leaders in these chaotic and complex environments? Like, what do you think drives that success more than anything?
it. Yeah, you mentioned the various organizations that I've had the opportunity to work with, and all of them have been so dynamic and, in my experience, positive. So if you take HCA, Hospital Corporation of America, arguably one of the best operators of hospitals in the world. They have just dialed it in. Their quality is fantastic. Their ability to engage the patient, their workforce, their physicians, the outcomes are, just incredible. So what a great experience. And I learned the mechanics of healthcare leadership and how to run an organization from HCA.
Mm.
When I transitioned over into nonprofit, faith based healthcare leadership, I learned the humanics of healthcare. And so when you think about, both sides of the equation, what I think really is imperative to great leadership is focus. and the focus on whatever the initiative is. You know, we talked about the pandemic, we talked about coming out of the pandemic and the financial crisis. There was one or two key priorities, or what I like to call the critical few focus areas that leaders, when they can really dial in not only their personal focus, their professional focus, but the collective focus of a team. And that could be an executive team or even a larger management team. When all individuals are fully aligned, some great outcomes come to pass. So I'll give you a quick example, and we'll refer back to the pandemic. But as you know, coming through that, it's like, gosh, you know, what do we do? How do we care for our teams? How do we keep our employees or our workforce safe? So very quickly, it was like, well, gosh, the three things that we have to do over the next 18 to 24 months is we need to keep our team safe, we need to keep our patients safe, and we need to keep our community safe. And that was the order of priority. And you can imagine, you know, I had to get behind that notion. I had to share that. I needed to see my colleagues at the executive level, at the board level, really support that notion. And once we were all aligned, it came out to the managers, the frontline leaders, and then, of course, the frontline teams. And when you have that exquisite alignment around that purpose, which is we're keeping our team safe, we're keeping our patients safe, and then we're going to keep our community safe, rather, all of that really started to generate some incredible information, some trust, some teamwork that perhaps I've not seen in my career. So that, I think, is a great example of how do we really gain alignment and excel in our leadership, and that's around focus.
Is that like a change in the way that people are leading in healthcare? Is that like a, mentioned like through these different pandemics, is that like the outcome that leadership needs to be different now? We need to lead with vision and alignment. Or has that always been the case?
I think it's always been there, Candice. I think often, as we started with, healthcare is very complex, and there are so many things that we have to do as leaders, as team members. And I think we can find that our focus or sometimes our energy is diluted across 20, 15, 30 different things. I work with
Mhm.
organizations every day when I say, you know, what are your priorities? And I'll get a list of 20, 30 priorities. And it's like, well, gosh, how can you accomplish all 30 things? And typically the conversation is, well, we have to. That's what's required of us to excel
Mhm.
and support our community and our patients and our teams. But I think what
Mhm.
happens is during time when we start to focus on the critical two or three things like we did during the pandemic, or like we do anytime in an organization when we have to get management focus or leadership focus, and we really double down on that alignment and the two or three things that need to be accomplished, that's when the greatest success happens. So I think it's always been there, but I also think that as an organization or as an industry, we can sometimes get lost in the complexity and try to do too much or try to accomplish too many things across our very, very full agenda.
So in
Yeah, there's
oh, go ahead,
go
Candace.
ahead. No, I was just
I was
gonna
just going to
comment.
say, on our last podcast, we had Dr. David Larson from Stanford, and he said something very similar. In fact, he opened with an example of this, which was that, they sat down as an organization and they tried to pick all of the things that they were going to go after, and the list was just so long. And they had to establish, like, what are the priorities on this list? Like, where do we start? Where do we focus? And they were able to, with a framework, really actually get after way more than I thought possible. I think by the end of the year, Candace, it was something like 40 something initiatives that they brought across the finish line successfully in like a really chaotic environment. But it was starting with hundreds and like drafting them down and being able to consume those, and really getting people's heads focused around those critical few. So common thread between your podcast and his there on what leads to success in chaos.
Yeah, if I might though, I would even take that a little bit further because I totally agree. It's the critical few getting really focused. It's also what is the problem that we're trying to solve with these priorities? Like what end and why are we doing this work? And
Yeah.
so yes, consolidating, prioritizing, but also getting very clear. And I think clarity is a really important part of leading in chaos, which is, do we actually know the why behind the initiatives or the priorities that we're trying to solve? Do we truly understand that? And more importantly, do we all buy into the why behind that? And if we do, then we can focus, and then we can do that with high definition or high clarity of understanding and purpose, again elevating the potential and all the capacity of a team.
That is a
Yeah.
good.
You would think that the why would just be, effective patient care or safe patient care. We're hospitals, we're providing care. But even the whys can be so much more complex than that. And I think that I was a nurse on the front line. I work in quality. So we're improving, frontline um, processes. But you can really feel if an organization is not aligned around a common goal. It's hard to make a decision about where to put your energy. It feels very disjointed and it feels very chaotic to even do any work because maybe it's a budget thing or it's a measures thing or it's a regulatory thing. And if your leadership doesn't kind of align or translate all of those towards a common goal, and maybe that's more of what it is because it all needs to be done, but can we translate it? Can we interpret all of these things towards a specific end so that we all feel aligned in our mission? And like what you said, that we can all connect with it in a way that really matters.
Yeah.
Do you think it's more of the translation of the goals and initiative?
Candice, that was beautifully stated. And I would add one element that I think is really powerful is, how do we internalize that? How do we believe that for ourselves
Yeah.
on an individual basis so that we bring that individual purpose to the collective power of the team? And Angela's
Yeah.
heard this from me in the past, but I think, I've always understood the power of why we do things. We've all seen mission or vision or purpose statements in organizations, but I think the first time that I really felt empowered by my own personal why, again, going back to the pandemic. And I remember getting a phone call from my mom and saying, gosh, it must just be crazy. Are you scared? Are you nervous? How are your teams going? And she made a comment, which was, hey, listen, you remember that your great grandmother died in the 1914-15 Spanish flu pandemic because at the very end, she contracted the virus, left a very large family, and your grandmother was the oldest daughter of that family who had to lead for the rest of her life, her siblings, and really reconcile what happened during that pandemic back in the 14s and the 1914 and 15s, because she lost her mom to a health event. And so I remember going, gosh, there's my why. My why in the pandemic was about, gosh, we can't have a family lose a parent. We can't have parents lose children. We can't do any of that. So all of a sudden, that was the power of my why that I could bring to the leadership to say, hey,
Yeah.
listen, we're all going to bring something that's really powerful that we can dig into in the times when it's really going to get tough. And that really navigated and helped me steer through some really challenging times. And so for me, that's always the powerful example of my why.
Yeah, it matters so much. Especially in healthcare, you're like every day you're just like seeing more and more patients. Maybe you're doing exams, the same exam over and over again, and you can get really caught up in the chaos of the personalities in your department, the local leadership, or like the misalignment with the vision. It can all feel very bad. And so you forget like why you were here to begin with. You forget what brought you, and you forget that each patient is having an experience with you that's meaningful. And, to your point, if we as healthcare workers can remember and connect with that, And if we have organizations that continue to focus on that, I think that we're all just better off. Not only is it better care for our patients, but it's just more meaningful for all of us. You know, we all got here for a reason. We all joined healthcare to save and help people. And yeah, I think that is probably some of the joy that we can bring back to work if we can remember that connection.
Yeah. Candice, I
Hmm.
couldn't agree more. That's very rich. So thank you for sharing.
John, I want to switch gears a little bit here, but it's on the same path. You coach a lot of CEOs that I would say are in chaos when you get to them. They're in some kind of transformation, they're in some kind of defining moment. Um, Tell us a little bit about your coaching style and how you approach those leaders and how you get them to this sense of clarity when I'm sure when you get to them, it's like hair on fire. What do I do? Help me solve my problem. Like you got to quickly kind of dial it down. Tell me about your coaching style and leading healthcare leaders.
Yeah. Well, first of all, I think healthcare leaders are so phenomenal to support and be a part of their journey. That's just such a gift in my life. And having sat in the chair and led organizations and been a part of extraordinary teams and mentored and coached by other great leaders, you bet. Being at the elbow or sometimes behind the scenes with an executive, and they do come in and they're like, I don't know how to solve this issue, or I'm lost in the middle of all this complexity. I'm losing myself. I'm losing my professional footing, and what do I do? And I think it gets back to a couple things. First of all, in healthcare delivery, we do a lot of simulation. We practice, we train, we're constantly validating our competencies. And what I love about that is we need to demonstrate that we can actually do the work that we say we can do because patients' lives are at stake. We have to have a trusted level of skill or professionalism as we come into those environments. What we don't typically train in healthcare, though, is how we show up once we're demonstrating or applying those technical or clinical skills. Because, Candice, you just mentioned, and Angela, I know you as a nurse as well, there's a lot that goes on inside when you're providing
Yeah.
the clinical care or you're trying to revive someone who's in the ICU who just decompensated, or you're working as a member of a team in a very critical situation trying to revive a patient in the emergency department. All of that is just, as you might imagine, unprecedented. It's chaotic, and our training gives us standards, practice, infrastructure, but how are we showing up in the middle of all of that? So the work that I do with executives is to say, we need to actually train ourselves how to respond to the chaos. What are the behaviors? What are the internal emotions that are coming forward? What are the derailers that we often experience? How do we drop into our highest performance? And we've often talked
Mm.
about, well, how do you get in the zone, or how do you drop into your flow to really do that? So the work that I do with executives is I try to pull them out of their office, pull them out of the work they do on a daily basis and say, hey, let's put you into a situation that is new, it's novel, and perhaps it's pushing your boundaries and maybe the edge of who you are as a leader, because I want you to get comfortable in the ambiguity. I want you to get comfortable knowing that you have probably a little bit more compassion or a little bit more capability to listen or a little bit more opportunity to hold yourself in neutrality or outside of judgment, so that
Mhm.
that practice can be applied when chaos happens. And it will happen, and it happens either on a daily basis, weekly, monthly basis. So,
Yeah.
and I love using outdoors as the classroom. So experiential learning for me is really big because that's how I learn. That's why we train and we demonstrate our skills and competencies. But how are we training being a leader and showing up in our best physiological and psychological states to really drive the highest performance and gifts that we have to offer to a specific situation. So that's a little bit about what and how I work with leaders.
And I
Are
can
you
tell
saying
you,
that?
I can tell you from my own experience, John gave me one of my very first feedbacks from my board while we were walking a trail in Montana that had signs everywhere
Mm.
about bears and danger. And here we are hiking through this bear infested woods. And the whole time I'm thinking, am I going to get eaten by a bear while John is delivering my results from my board on how they felt like I was doing? The very next adventure, I was like, had told John at some point, which don't ever tell John what your fear is. He will make you do it. Is that I have this very unusual fear of sharks. And the next thing I knew, I was diving in Belize with John, and sharks were literally a foot away from my face. And so, yeah, he puts you in scenarios in which you do have to figure out quickly how to drop into your flow. And then you
Mm.
mimic that behavior when the pressure is really on. So, speaking from experience here.
Okay, so my biggest fear is gourmet meals in Italy with very expensive wine
For some
with
reason, I'm not
level of
buying
exposure
into this
therapy.
here, but yes, I love that. It's expand your wilderness of
Yeah.
food culinary experience, right? Love it.
Thank you. Thank you.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah,
But,
I was
go
just going to
ahead.
say, in those experiences, what we often find, and I think we all can demonstrate this at one point or another, whether we were in sports growing up, whether we, again, we're in the arts or performing. My mother's a performance organist and pianist. And I always look at people who perform at their highest and best state. And I think, gosh, did they just accidentally find themselves in flow or in the zone?
Mm.
But what I find is with high performing leaders, professional athletes, anybody that I've studied for a long time, is they actually understand the markers or the milestones before they drop into that state of highest performance flow or in the zone. And they understand what it takes to drop in and the landscape milestone markers of saying, okay, now I'm a little bit anxious, but I'm starting to like catch my breath and my respiratory rate is starting to come down a little bit. I'm starting to see some clarity. Things are starting to
Mm.
become a little bit more understood, that I can start to assimilate all of the stimulus and the information in a way that I normally don't do so that I can respond effectively. And when you start
Mm.
to learn how you drop in, that's really important. And it's also important to know we can't always be at our highest and best levels of performance. We can't always live in the zone. And I think as leaders, sometimes we expect to be in the highest performing state all the time. That's not the case. We can only do that for so long. And then we need to drop out. We need to recover. We need to rest. We need to find the time to rejuvenate so that at the right time, again, we can drop in, but we can access that more readily and be at our highest and best state to perform, lead, to demonstrate anything that would be of value to our organization and to our team.
Mm.
So many insights to unpack there. I think what we'll do is we'll do a little brief and just get some of those nuggets. Would love to have you on the podcast again. In closing, I wanted to ask you a question because in just spending time with you, I feel like you're one of the most authentic leaders that I've worked with. And I just wonder, like, what is your sense about the power of authenticity in leading teams through successful transitions in the midst of chaos? And how does that play into this?
Yeah, it's a great question, Angela. And, one of my great mentors and coaches brought this very notion, the ethos that I often try to share with others, which is leaders go first. And you can't show up in authenticity unless you're authentic with yourself. And so are you willing to come into the inner self and be authentic and be true and say, okay, what are my gifts? What are my opportunities, what are my blind spots, and stay in that space, not always, but for periods of time where it's productive, meaning that are we finding solitude where we can just really sit down and say, who am I and how am I doing in terms of my leadership and what are the opportunities, and practicing a little self-forgiveness, but also practicing incremental improvement. And I do think that when we go first as a leader and we do the inner work, we rumble with our inner selves, we start to realize that we're okay. We're comfortable with who we are. We can grow internal authenticity because once we start to accept who we are and we can be authentic with ourselves, it's very natural for us to share that outside. So I always like to say, you can't fake caring. As a healthcare leader, and you're out on the front lines and you're with your teams care. They're called to that work. They love taking care of other people and in doing that type of work. If a leader shows up and we try to show that we care and it's not our nature or it's not authentic, a nurse, a physician, a therapist, an environmental service worker, they will sniff that out in a heartbeat. So having the ability in our nature to show up authentically, as well as in our full caring and our full humanity, if we can reconcile that internally, it's much easier to share with those that we have the opportunity to serve.
I mean, that's true to leadership, and I would say it's true to life. Just, I think if the goal is experience and connection and care, if you get the opportunity to do it as a leader and bring people along with you, what a gift. What a gift. Thank you so much, John. That was lovely.
You bet.
John, I feel like after listening to this, you're probably going to have a bunch of our healthcare executive leaders that want to know, can they talk to you? Can they have a coaching session? How do they reach you? How do they get on your agenda, I guess?
Well, let me just say this. I would love to talk to any healthcare leader that's going through that personal journey or in a challenging situation. I do that all the time. Anybody who calls me up, I would just love to have the conversation to say, how can I help? What can we do to work through this together? And obviously, I can provide my contact information, but I think that's probably a really key takeaway. I'm one of many. I'm one of 100 people out in your network that you could reach out to. I think during times of chaos and complexity, sometimes we try to figure it out on our own, or we have one or two people that we try to talk to all the time. But there are a lot of people within our network that we can have access to. And let's be bold and courageous and reach out to people that we don't really.
Mm.
Their experience, I think, will enrich in how we will approach and how we elevate our leadership to the next level.
Mm.
Love it. Candice, you want to wrap us up?
Well, before we go, I just want to know, John, are there any books that you would recommend? Top one, top three? Give us something that we can go and kind of learn more.
Yeah, I'm going to give you a little bit of a different answer on that, Candice. And here's the quick story. Read
Okay.
something that you're not interested in learning about. Meaning, if you want to learn about leadership, there's a lot of leadership books that are great, and those are powerful, and I think we should read those. But I think we should expand and read something about architecture. We should read something about
Mm.
permaculture or gardening or wine and food in Italy, whatever it is. There is something that is a corollary that will pique the interest of the problems that we're trying to solve in our work. And there's a lot of solutions hidden in materials and reading outside of what we normally think will help us elevate our leadership. So my invitation is, go find something really interesting that you love and read it with the intention that it's going to improve your leadership. And my sense will be you'll learn something from that will elevate who
Mhm.
you requires a
Oh, I love that perspective and creativity and community. I just feel like there was such a thread in everything that you've meant talked to us about today. That is so genuine, like Angela said, so authentic. Thank you so much for joining us. It was such a pleasure to have you, and we look forward to when you come back and talk to us again.
Thank you,
Thanks
Deb.
so much, John.
It's been a lot of fun. Thank you.
All
Thank you,
right.
John.
Well, thank you to our audience for joining us on Success in Chaos. Please be sure to like, follow, and share today's episode on Spotify, Apple Podcast, YouTube, or wherever you get your podcast. And a special thanks to the Inflow Health team for their production support.